It's the Let's Talk Polyamory pod, where we talk about all things consensual non-monogamy, polyamory, open relationships, swinging, and how you can have secure and sexy relationships no matter how you do them. Today we have a very special podcast where we get up close and personal with an unscripted recording of how we are in the process de-escalating our relationship. And that happens in the first 18 minutes. And that's followed by a previously recorded training called Is It Time to De-escalate Our Relationship? Where we discuss how you might know if it's time for you and how to approach doing it. Now here's your hosts, Tara and Andre.
Hey, Andre.
Hey, Tara.
We thought we would record a bit of a spontaneous podcast.
Yeah,
Was there a topic you had in mind?
No, not really. Just the casualness of it, because we just finished recording one on Can Polyamory Save My Marriage? But we usually research it and we will kind of brainstorm it before. We'll have a frame, a structure that we want to follow. We might even have some notes. But I thought maybe it'd be interesting to just come on and speak from our stream of consciousness and just talk about how we are. Did that make you feel excited or nervous?
Maybe nervous, but I actually had an idea while you were talking about that. Because we talked about how will opening up my relationship save my marriage? So then the question is, will closing down your relationship to monogamy or de-escalating your relationship save your marriage?
Oh, interesting. But they're not the same. Closing it down, like becoming monogamous from open and then
de-escalating.
De-escalating.
Yeah. Okay, they are different.
Yeah. It's interesting that you use the word de-escalate. And so I suggested that for a variety of reasons that we would reconceptualize our relationship a little bit. We decided that we might kind of step back a little bit for now anyway. But the term that came to mind is de-escalation. And right away, it makes me think of the combat zone, right? Like we want to de-escalate. And it seems, my perception, it feels combative. But what I want is to maintain a loving relationship, but that is not as emotionally defaulted, right? I talk about, do you lose yourself when you get married, right? You get modified without
We just
knowing.
spoke about it.
I kind of stepped on the relationship escalator, whereas I protested before, but it was so inviting to be with you. It's so wonderful to be with you. There's so many great aspects that I naturally allow myself to come to it until I'm by myself and I think, you know, I've got to do this. I don't want to do that, but I usually let Tara do it. I'll just let her do it. It's like mommy will make me dinner. And that's wonderful. But,
I like being your mommy sometimes.
And I love you being my mommy sometimes. And sometimes I want to be your daddy. But what happens for me is that emotionally, I kind of lose myself a little bit. And that's not you. That's on me. But it's like I've let myself go back on this relationship escalator. And here we are, fast forward. And very often, I feel as that we've become a we in a marriage. Yeah. People look at us as, oh, her and Andre. Yeah, right? We become coupled in that way, which is a wonderful thing. You're a great partner. But I've not honored my way of being independent that way. I default you. And that's me, not you. But my level of codependence, my attachment style, makes it so, and then I get alerted by it. So I say to that, well, what if I were to kind of, in a loving, open way, because we're all about communication, what if I were to say, well, I still love you, but I want to dial it back a bit. I want to recalibrate. I want to kind of make it that we're two individuals coming together again. I don't want to default. I don't want to automatically assume, because I think that also sometimes in our way of communication, we might say things that we would not necessarily say or feel or think, good and bad, if we were simply dating.
Right. And that's what we just said about being married. And that's what happens. Well, I think the reason I called it de-escalating is because you're going down on the relationship escalator.
Oh.
That's where de-escalation comes from.
De-escalatoring.
When you're on the relationship escalator, you're escalating. So your relationship is becoming more committed, and typically you're following that pattern of, dating, becoming a committed relationship, being monogamous, getting married, having kids, having a house, and that sort of thing. And both of us never wanted to get on the relationship escalator, or we chose as we went. But maybe a better term, which you would enjoy more than de-escalation, because that's what it feels like. It feels like you're saying, and I don't disagree. I feel like we have become more like a married couple. And I think part of that is because of locations. Now we're in two cities. We own places in two cities. So when we're together for an amount of time. Yeah. And before, we lived in the same block, but we had our own places. So you could come over one night, I could come over, we could be by ourselves, you could have dates.
And it was like, stay casual.
Well, I don't think we were casual.
Well, it felt casual that I could just come over. You could just come over. Now,
but I wasn't moving clothes in. Like nobody was moving clothes in. Where I have like quite a lot of clothes and things here because it's a pain in the ass every 2 weeks to like pack a bunch of things. But maybe a better term than de-escalation is maybe you want to be more like anarchy, where we're co-creating the aspects of the relationship we want to keep and which ones we don't want to have. Maybe would that feel better? Because that's the aspect of relationship anarchy that I like, is that no relationship has importance over another. And you treat relationships, loving relationships with family, friends, parents, lovers in a similar way in that you're creating them in themselves. So you don't say because we're in a loving sexual relationship, our relationship is more important than my relationship with my parents. They're just different.
Yeah, they're different.
So what would you try? How do you try that on?
I like some of the tenets of a relationship anarchy, but I'm not sure that I subscribe to all of it. Like you said, I could be with my so-called primary, and then something happens to my other friend and their house is on fire. It doesn't mean, well, hey, I had a date with my primary. Sorry, I'm not going to run to your rescue. There are times when we are going to go and avail ourselves to that, right? So,
but you wouldn't have a primary in a relationship anarchy.
No, but I'm just saying we could be in a hierarchical relationship and still allow for other times when we are going to suspend the level of
absolutely.
But no, for me it's more the question of the verbiage used in escalating and de-escalating. Even escalating in itself sounds as though there's like a tension, right? There's a violence. The situation is escalating, right? But we don't often think of tender moments and saying it's starting to escalate. Maybe we do, but de-escalating.
I don't think escalation is a bad thing. Well, but I can see how de-escalation as a word, because when I said it to you, when you first presented this idea, I was like, oh, so we're de-escalating the relationship. I said it sort of like matter-of-factly, and I think you took great offense to the fact.
Well, maybe I was picking up on the idea that it didn't sound so inviting at that moment. Maybe there was like some defending against the idea of it, right? It's like, whoa, like we're going to de-escalate now. It's like, but I wonder, could there be a way of saying what I feel it to be, which is still maintaining a loving relationship, but kind of resisting the default aspects of it, resisting the taking for granted aspects of it. And I'm saying that I was doing those things, right?
Right. But then I guess you have to figure out, as I'd like to do, is the practicality of it. What does that mean? So yeah, sure, keep the loving aspects of it. Like I like that in concept, but what does it actually mean in practicality? Does that impact, how much time we spend together? Does it impact, I don't know, what does it impact?
How we automatically assume certain things. Or there's a whole lot that we're going to have to figure out, right?
Yeah.
We've never been to it. It's amazing because some of these things feel familiar, but in another aspect, we've never been there. We're writing this code as we go.
Yeah.
But we do what we do. We keep communicating.
Keep communicating. So there's certain aspects that you'd like to keep?
The knowing that you are a trusting, loving, wonderful person. I want to keep those aspects of it, right? But it's really, a lot of it is the inside job of wanting to feel as though I haven't lost myself, that there's still some aspect of autonomy in me, and that I don't just assume, I don't just take it for granted that I have this awareness, but also feeling as though, because we are 500 miles apart for so often, that you're not necessarily just looking to me, or I'm just looking to you as that go-to person, that I feel as though I am more readily able to stand on my own and feel secure in that knowledge.
And do you think we have a different experience of our relationship to each other in terms of that independence?
Yeah, no doubt. How could we not?
Because I think that's part of your reason for wanting to make a change, is that you don't feel like you stand on your own a lot. Like you were joking when you said sometimes I'm your mommy, but you were also very serious about it too.
Yeah.
And I think you said to me, and I hope it's okay to share this, that you feel like I have much more in place in terms of independence and survivability, and I do a lot of things on my own.
Yeah.
And I've created a bit of more of a network for myself over time.
Well, and but I mean, part of that is a practical thing too, right? I came to Montreal 2 years ago for financial and mostly for reasons to take care of my mother, and now she's not there, and here I am without that community, right? I mean, I spent time making a community in Toronto and in New York, but now Montreal is new, so yeah, I don't feel as though I have those same things. So it would be much more tempting for me to just fall to you to be that person and say, well, you create this for me. I'm feeling scared or alone or whatever. Could you be that person. I'll dump it all onto you and you hold it for me. You be my mommy. You make sure I'm going to be taken care of tonight.
Yeah.
But in that, as wonderful as that is to have you do that for me, I have to forfeit part of myself. Whereas when we first met, I was much more confident. I was much more independent and autonomous. And then I came to you saying, well, here's what I have to offer. Here's my invitation. And would you like to walk with me? As opposed to now, it often feels like, well, I'm kind of, whatever, would you carry me?
I don't feel like that's
no,
a total representation. It's maybe how you feel,
that's
for
how
sure.
I feel. It's an inside job. Yeah. So those things often kind of alert me.
Yeah, it'll be a really good experiment to do at the very least. We can approach it with detached curiosity. As I say to my clients, is like, let's do it as an experiment and see what changes and see, this is the idea. Like, things don't have to stay fixed. If it's not working for one or both of you, then obviously something has to change.
As you said, it makes me think about the question of secure attachment. And if we modify, if we change this, will I feel as though I've lost that secure attachment, or would it even be an opportunity for greater security? Feeling as though, even though it's been de-escalated, even though it's been modified, I still feel connected, and I still feel as though we have this part that is still remaining true. And does that help me to feel more secure? So can I go outside it and still feel secure?
Just smiling. I would like to obviously remain in a relationship with you in some way, and I'm interested to see how this evolves.
Yeah, I'd like to remain in a relationship with you as well. Stay tuned.
Anything else you wanted to talk about?
Not in particular, just I guess this is more for us. I was kind of hoping that we would have the casual kind of playfulness, that unscripted spontaneity, because we jive well.
I picked too serious of a topic to talk about.
We talk about everything. It's what we do. It's one of the things we do.
I think maybe we should put to broadcast.
What's the topic?
How to modify, how to not remain fixed. Is it time to de-escalate? We actually did a talk on that. We could maybe even blend in some of that to this, add it in. For
me, a subtopic was going without a script. So we are writing this new story in our life. We don't know where it's going to go.
It sort of spoke to your feeling of wanting to be less scripted, because you felt like we've gotten too scripted in what we do.
In a sense, yeah, that these are roles that we've created because of, and now accurate are they, or are they open to change? Can we have modification and fluctuation in them?
One of the things that I'm thinking of, and I think I mentioned this to you, is like when we had our friends over, I was feeling uncomfortable because she was asking me, how come I'm not here more? And I'm like, well, work. And I was feeling like a bouncing ball, which I was. I was starting to feel like that.
Almost like borderline resentment towards it.
Yeah, like even though I have stuff here, and which is amazing, it's easy for me to come here because you've created a nice home and you've allowed me space for that. I still felt like I was living in a suitcase. And I was feeling unsettled. And, I had a lot of things I wanted to do. And, and so part of that was unsettling. Maybe you did this for me. Did you do this for me?
But you were reluctant to share with them.
Oh yeah, that's where I was going with this. See what happens when I'm unscripted. You're really good unscripted. I tend to not be.
And you know what? I think you're better scripted, and I'm less so, because I don't know how to scroll or follow that thing. So we complement each other. Yeah,
I was feeling uncomfortable. Like I was concerned about sharing, because when I've shared that before, like I've shared that with other people, and they don't really understand it. And they asked me how I felt. And I was like, well, it's a change. And, at first I was upset, but then I was sort of like, my initial reaction, I think, because I was surprised, was upset.
Well, it could be threatening.
Yeah, it felt a bit threatening. And, you had said you wanted to be solo poly. And I was like, okay, so what does that mean? And, my initial reaction was, I'm just going to fucking come and get all my stuff, right? I'm going to come today. I'm going to take my car. I'm going to take all my stuff, burn the house down.
You want change? I'll show you change.
Yes. But then, we sat with it and you said, I really want to talk more about it. And I was like thinking all these things, right? But I think it's hard for people to understand, like vanilla friends. But I think even people that we're friends with as a couple, like that couple, I was having a hard time sharing that, because I was like, oh, what would they think? And is it going to affect our relationship with them? Or will they no longer want to see us because they'll think we're in a volatile relationship?
And it could threaten our changing a relationship, could threaten theirs, right? They'd be like, wow, what happens if my partner now is going to say, I want that? Also, yeah, it can be dangerous, right?
Yeah, or maybe it could shine a light for other people, and maybe there's a different way to do it.
Well, if you are also thinking that at times you feel as though you have become the default setting, or taking each other for granted in whatever capacity. Maybe this is the eye opener, the warning to it. It's interesting, speaking about this, I wanted this to be very casual about you and I, and maybe whoever's watching this could watch this, but that it would be unscripted and stuff. But as we're saying this, I'm wondering, what would it be like if couples were to have the communications that we're always saying is so important, but if they were to imagine that there'd be a third listening, that it's going to be broadcast, would we kind of be a little bit more, what's the expression? A little bit more
attuned, more listening, better communicator.
All those things, yeah. And how would we select the words we're going to use, and would we be more considerate of how it's going to land, and all those things? Like, would it kind of be the judge and jury, the ready in the room, that some people, because when they go into difficult conversations, they might find it difficult to say it, feels safe, whatever, or they're having a hard time expressing it. But if they felt as their announcements were being monitored in a way, or that there was going to be a record of it, would it influence the way that they are going to come out and say what it is they're going to say?
Might be an actual exercise to do, is even if you just recorded something on your computer and just like see if your conversation was different.
Right.
And then play it back and then see what you did.
Right.
More, again, like for detached curiosity, right? Not to judge, but to say like, oh, what could I have done differently? You know what I mean?
Or what was, when that was said, how did that make me feel? Like, what was my level of comfort? Or why didn't I say this? Or how could I have said it any differently? Or, it's a whole bunch of things. It could be a great teaching tool.
Yeah. Because we do that with couples we work with, right? We've had them have a conversation, like we pick something that's difficult that they want to talk about, and we actually coach them through it. And it's really powerful. It's like, well, what if you had said this, and then it's like, oh, okay, I wouldn't have thought to say it like that. Anyways.
Well, it's interesting, right? If they did do these recordings, and would they be able to, play it and then stop it and say, well, what were you thinking there? Like, does that match what your feelings or your thoughts were? And how did you feel when I said that? I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to you. I want to just be here. Listen, it's always wonderful because we're always communicating. Maybe I don't always like the way the conversation goes, or who knows what the outcome's going to be, but I get a sense of security knowing that we can talk about things.
Yeah.
And I thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I think I had a hard time because I think we communicate mostly very well. And I think it felt to me that it was being positioned that there was more difficult, like not good conversations than there were good conversations. And I think that's where I struggled with and was most upset about, was feeling like you felt that, we don't talk well together all the time. And I don't think that's the case. I think there's definitely some cases that have come up, but that on the whole, I think our communication has been pretty great. So I think that's where it was hard for me. And then I felt that, my initial feeling was blowing this up because, of something that I don't think is actually there.
Right. And did that then create a feeling that you were being in any way judged or rejected?
Maybe. I feel differently about it now. I'm getting more comfortable with the idea, and maybe it feels a bit more stable too. It's part of what we talk about, getting, when you're with someone for a long time, is, not taking them for granted, like you said, and keeping things interesting. And, it's going to be an interesting thing to figure out.
And also makes me think that things are often cyclical, right? That we have different seasons. So maybe at one point we are so intense with each other, and then other times we need a little bit of distance, and then we come back. And, so I mean, it plays out in different ways.
Somebody asked me if you were worried at all that you might lose me.
Yeah, for sure. There's always that possibility. You could say, you know what, I'm not wanting to de-escalate. I'm not wanting to modify it in that way. So either I want this or I don't, and you could be well within your rights to say that. So yeah, there's always the possibility. But again, it speaks to our secure attachment or insecure attachment. And if I were to be under that threat, if that was such a high consideration, would I then simply say, well, you know what, the threat of losing you is so fantastic, I'm going to just minimize this feeling and not announce it, which kind of plays back to the earlier part. Am I feeling as though I can only exist if I'm in the relationship, as opposed to saying, well, I can tolerate that possibility because I know I want to come to you willingly and openly, and not feel as though it's in any way because I feel I can't imagine life without it. For me, that's kind of the threatening part. Awesome. Is that okay? Are we going?
We could be done. We done? You have it. Okay.
All right. Well, I'm excited about today's topic. It actually came up in conversation with one of my partners who told me that they were de-escalating a relationships. And then we coincidentally, you and I started talking about it on the weekend. So for everyone who's joining us for the first time, I'm Tara, and I'm a relationship and awesomeness coach.
I'm Andre. I am a sex positive psychotherapist.
Yeah. And we are the co-founders of the online community Let's Talk Polyamory. We have an Instagram with the same name. So if you're not following us, you should follow us there because we post some fun things there. And co-creators of our group program, Open Relationship and Polyamory Mastery, which helps couples open in a way that's secure and healthy and allows them to keep the stability of their relationship without explore things that maybe they want to explore. In fact, the people we've worked with, a lot of them, it's really strengthened their relationship. It's pretty exciting to see all of that.
Yeah, it sure is.
And let us know if you have ever de-escalated a relationship.
De-escalated as opposed to simply breaking up, ghosting.
This is the interesting thing is that I think prior to becoming polyamorous, I thought that there was basically two options. So break up or stay together. There wasn't kind of a middle ground. And I think that's sort of polyamory sort of, I think, allows for that sort of opportunity. I really loved this little thing from Carrie from Sex and the City that says, if you break up, where does the love go?
Good question.
If you still love someone, is there another option? And basically that's what we're talking about today.
So it needn't be an all or nothing kind of deal.
Yeah. So what do you think? Have you de-escalated a relationship? Maybe you didn't use that term. I certainly haven't used that term before.
Yes, I have. And I was also not aware at the time that it was being de-escalated. We didn't use that term, but we did make a modification to the relationship. And it was easier than I thought it would have been in some ways. And again, the key of that was because we did talk about it. We did speak openly about it. So we can get into that a little bit later. What about yourself? What's your experience been like with it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a common thing, and I think, again, we're going to talk about it later, where you go like, oh, let's break up, but can we be friends? But there's really not any discussion about that. And I think a lot of the times it's a hard thing to do, because it's hard. I think sometimes that it's the time to break up with someone, but then don't know what the other option is. I certainly didn't know the other option. So if they're not like, let's be friends, or if they didn't allow me the opportunity to say like, hey, let's stay connected. Because for some people, it's too hard, too. Like, that's the other part.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, right? Because you and I might be in a relationship, and then I might say, or you might say to me, maybe we need to modify this. Maybe we need to kind of de-escalate it. But you invite me to remain friends, and maybe I feel rejected or hurt by it. And it is difficult for me to have these still strong, intense feelings for you and only be your friend. So sometimes we're resistant to it.
Yeah.
But we might actually really want to remain connected, right? Where does that love go? Do we want to maintain that? And could we? So we make that invitation to the other person, but we also respect if it is difficult for them to do it. But then if they are not wanting to participate in it, what are they left with? Do they get that all or nothing kind of feeling, right? So either they're in it or they're out of it.
Yeah, I've definitely been in that all or nothing situation. So, I mean, I think it's important to put a definition, because actually when we posted the topic, someone said, what does it mean to de-escalate a relationship? Because I think it's a pretty new-ish term, and maybe it's not something that, flows around in monogamy circles maybe, but de-escalating is when you reduce the level of intimacy or connection in a relationship. Like, that's a very general, I'd say, definition.
Intimacy, the reduction of intimacy, connection, or commitment.
Yes. And so it can be intentional and consensual, like two people come together and say, hey, let's change the nature of our relationship. Or it can be sudden or uninitiated by one person.
Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if, given this idea, the newness of it for us, but if we were aware of this before, is it something that we should introduce in our relationship as we start to hang out? So we say, we start seeing each other, we like each other, and it's starting to kind of get into a greater frequency. And we say, well, I'm looking for this kind of thing, I'm looking for that kind of thing. And we kind of make these agreements and we go at it that way. But should we also have almost like a prenup where we say, well, what happens in the event that in the future we might want to shift the level of intimacy or commitment? How are we going to go about that? Should we invite that conversation as well so that we could already have this awareness to it?
Yeah. Well, I like that idea. So what kinds of things, are there things that you think that you could talk about in advance?
Yes, well, I'm thinking, if it were to go that way, how would we ever introduce it, and what would the implications be? Because I think right now, if I were in a relationship with somebody and they said, well, I'm thinking that maybe I'd like to step back a little bit, or I want to modify the relationship, my initial feeling would probably be that, well, is there something that I might have done wrong, or were you not feeling enough of a certain thing? And I would probably internalize that. But it might also be a very natural course that these new relationship energies drive us to want to have this great intense thing, but after time it might kind of subside a little bit, and maybe the natural course is that we would want to change the level of commitment or intimacy. So if we have the awareness of it and we talk about it prior, would it make it easier to kind of shift lanes and make those changes without it feeling so personalized?
Yeah, and I think that's where we're going to get into the sort of the sevens to work on in a relationship, but like where relationship reviews and check-ins come in, right? Because if you're continuously checking in, there's opportunities to talk about what's working, what's not working, if you'd like things change, without having the like, oh my God, I have to have this conversation. If you have a regularly scheduled time, and maybe it's something easier to approach it. So
yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. Yeah, if we are in the habit of kind of doing these check-ins and seeing where we're at and addressing whatever might be coming up, maybe we don't feel as though we have to kind of say, okay, well, that's it, like I'm out of here and I'm making a cut. Maybe it can make it easier to modify the relationship and increase what's working, and maybe de-escalate what's not working as much.
So when people decide to de-escalate, it could be for a number of reasons. It can be because of what they feel are shortcomings in the relationship, or incompatibility, or something else. And I don't think it has to be a bad thing. Like you said earlier, it can be a natural progression to where the relation was meant to be. And, as I mentioned also earlier, I think this is one of the parts of polyamory that's kind of cool, is that we have the ability, if you're doing it in an ethically open, consensual way, of looking at relationships, and they don't need to be one specific thing, and that you can have different relationships with different people. Just like we have friendships and relationships with our parents that are different, we can have different relationships with people that we are in more emotional, intimate, or sexually intimate relationships with. They don't all have to be a very prescribed thing that's going in a very prescribed way.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So being polyamorous, being open in this way, it really does lend itself to so many different varieties, right? It's not the kind of, one-on-one contractual relationship that monogamy often subscribes to. There are different flavors to this. You really hit it there. It's when it's consensual. Right? We talk about these things and we find out, is it going to work for each other? So in my case, for example, I was in a relationship with somebody, and we had the trappings of all of the traditional kind of relationships, I guess you'd say. But then at one point, when we started to open up our relationship, my partner said that they were not feeling comfortable with the idea of being sexual with other people, even though we were still very much emotionally connected. So we had a discussion about becoming asexual in our relationship, but we still maintained a very strong love connection. Thinking about it, in some ways, when we did remove the sexual part of it, we had to find other ways to demonstrate our love, and the emotional bonds became perhaps even closer. It's not to say that it could not have been otherwise, or that it's going to automatically happen. But for us, because we talked about it so openly, it really did allow for that expression as well. So it was actually, in a sense, a loss on one side, but a gain on the other side.
That relationship is still very, very strong now, and you consider that person your other primary relationship, if you want to label it in some way.
Very strong. In fact, I'm nesting with them at the moment. It is very strong till to this day.
Yeah, which is awesome. So then some people may be asking themselves, like, is it time to de-escalate a relationship? So I think, as we always do, Andre, we always say, let's do some thinking about it. Ask yourself the question, what's driving this feeling of wanting to either break up or de-escalate? Because
I think that's always a fantastic question to ask ourselves, right? Is what's driving these feelings? What's my motive behind this, right? So we might have the initial feeling, but what's behind that feeling? Sometimes there's a secondary gain to it. But what is at play? What is going on that's making me consider this? So is it that there's something perhaps that's not working so well in the relationship, or is it something more about myself and questions of intimacy or avoidance? What is going on? So we can ask ourselves that and become informed, so then we can really make an informed decision about what we're wanting and where we should be going with it.
So some examples of things that might be driving the feeling. So it could feel like the relationship is just too much work or too hard. It may feel like conversations turning into arts. Maybe you're not able to agree on certain things in the relationship, like how they're going to work. So there may be things that are non-negotiable for one person, but the other person can't agree to that. Like there's no alignment on it. So it's hard to make a particular agreement on that particular matter. There could be broken rules or boundaries, which is like, these are some of the serious things I'm listing now that might cause you to rethink it. You might have different interests, so sexual or non-sexual, needs not being met, bored, lonely.
Feeling more like friends than lovers, right? Experiencing more excitement and NRE with others. So maybe our focus or attention changes, our excitement towards each other changes, and that might shift over time.
Yeah, it could be a logistics thing, like people are just too far away. You're not able to see them in person, and you're having a hard time staying connected. You might want to continue to love the person and have a strong emotional connection, but not necessarily a sexual one, like you said.
Or vice versa, right? We might want to maintain the sexual one, but not want to have such an emotional connection. Sometimes it might feel as though it's taxing to us psychically to be in that thing. We might want to shift that.
Exactly. So some of these things may signal that a breakup is necessary. Sometimes, we don't want to do that thing, but if we feel that someone's continuously ignoring our boundaries, we've made efforts and that sort of thing to talk to them about it, and it's just not working out for us, or if there's anything like abuse or anything like that, or even if we feel like we can't be a full person in that relationship, it might be the time to break up. But, there might be an opportunity to make a change or to dig in and revive things. So like lack of communication or ongoing arguments, jealousy, insecurity. Like if you're just opening up a relationship and then you're hit with all these things and all of a sudden it seems like you can't talk to each other again. And this happens to people. And maybe there's things to work on.
Yeah. So on one extreme, it is going all the way to breaking up and severing all the ties with the person and saying, well, I want nothing to do with them because it just seems as though our needs aren't being met or it's just too demanding, too taxing. But before we get to that point, are we able to look at some of the things, like you said, like jealousy or arguments, communication, find out what's at play and how might we address them? Because maybe we don't have to blow the whole thing up. Maybe we can modify it. Maybe we can explore it and come to different feelings, different understandings about it, where we are able and wanting to maintain the relationship, even if it's going to be modified. Or maybe we find ways of even strengthening it beyond what we have now.
For some people, and I hate to say this, but the very act of opening a relationship causes a huge break in it. And then it calls into question sometimes things that you thought you were good at, like I said, like communication. But if that's the case, like I feel like my personal view is that it's always good to make an effort to try. Like if you still have feelings for the person, you still care for the person, but there's some things that just feel like they're not working out right. I personally like to go for the let's try and see if the other person's willing, right? And there's still feelings there.
I think you're absolutely correct because initially we were drawn to each other for whatever reason. And what happened to those reasons? Are they still valid? So maybe they're still valid, but we find out, well, I still like all of these other traits about the person, but we're not communicating so well. We don't really see eye to eye. And then we go to something like attunement communication, right? We learn how to communicate more effectively, more openly and honestly. And that in itself could have a huge impact on how we relate with each other.
Yeah. I mean, there's, these are there's 7, we have 7 foundational things that are in our program, Open Relationship and Polyamory Mastery. And they're the foundational things for a reason, because they are the things that create a successful open or polyamorous relationship. And you may not realize that you didn't have these things until you open a relationship and maybe something happens. So attunement communication, it's always our number one thing, Andre?
Communication. It's all about communication. Yeah. So the better you are at communicating, the better your relationships are going to be, whether it is about romantic relationships or work relationships. But attunement communication is one of the foundations to having successful relationships.
Yeah. And one of the other things that comes up for people commonly and that you can address is understanding your attachment style and how it's impacting your relationship. Because you may not have noticed it when you're monogamous, because the very fact of being monogamous is a bit of a logistical, I guess, I don't know, secure attachment. I'm going to put it in quotations because it always doesn't. But if you understand how it's impacting your relationship, you have the ability to build stronger attachment within yourself and in your relationship. So that's that's number 2.
And the next one that's of such importance is overcoming our feelings of jealousy and building that security, right? Finding ways that we can not feel as though the jealousy is the biggest part of a relationship, but right-sizing it and finding out how we are able to not only survive it, but again, minimize its impact on us. We might still always feel some degree of jealousy,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to be this big monster that we feel powerless over.
Yeah, exactly. And the other part of this is like, what is your relationship going to look like? So we call it the relationship blueprint, because I think that's one of the things that when people open a relationship, particularly if you're opening a relationship, is like, you're going like, okay, we're going to do this thing. Maybe we're going to have some threesomes and, have all this sexy fun, but we're not really talking about exactly the details of how it's going to work. And I think that's the part where things start to go sideways, is when there's assumptions made, you don't know what you want. So part of what we do after we work on some of those other things is we develop that relationship blueprint so that you're co-creating with your partner and partners the type of relationship you want, at least from a starting point. And then, you can develop it as you go, but agreeing on what that's going to be and what does it look like and feel like and all that stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. It is so helpful to have those agreements in place. And that also leads itself into the other part of understanding what our personal boundaries are and communicating that and establishing and co-creating our value-based agreements.
Yeah, because those are the things that are going to help you in implementing that blueprint. So knowing what your boundaries are so they don't get crossed, each of yours. Then, creating agreement around the things that you value in your relationship, so you know what to say and do to uphold those values in your relationship.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate, but some people have a very difficult time expressing their personal boundaries, but we do help you to find ways of realizing what they are, establishing them, and then communicating them to others, and also how to recognize other people's boundaries and honor them and maintain them.
Yeah. I love that part of our Training the Boundaries one. I think it's super awesome. I mean, I know when we created it, I started looking at my own boundaries and things that I find more difficult to announce and acknowledge, and have gotten much better at it. And it feels like, at first, sometimes it's hard to express your boundaries, but when you do, people want, I like to go with the belief that people want to respect our boundaries and don't want to cross them. And so if you think that way as a starting point, then you're more likely to feel more comfortable crossing them.
But also when I'm with somebody and they announce their boundaries, it helps make me feel more secure, because then I know what it is they're wanting and not wanting, as opposed to it being, well, I'm not sure how they feel about this, or how, whatever it is. So making good boundaries makes for good neighbors, and it helps us to know what it is, and that creates a feeling of security. But it also goes back to the earlier part about, does the relationship feel like it's too much work? And initially it might feel like, oh my God, this is so much work being in this. Is it even worth it? But it does get easier over time. So the more acquainted we are with announcing our boundaries, the easier it gets over time. It's kind of like when we first bring up the topic of STI testing. In the beginning, it was rather foreign and seemed kind of awkward. And now I say it in a very matter-of-fact kind of way, and people seem to respond quite well to it. So it gets easier with time the more we practice this.
Yeah, exactly. And then so the other part of the foundational parts are also spending time to build and maintain connection and grow it within your relationship. Because I think that's something that gets put aside sometimes when we start to have relationships with other people. We're not nurturing our other relationships because we get into the new relationship energy in that. And then the last part, as we talked about, is doing those relationship reviews and check-ins. And we have a whole process that we teach people in the program, but those are super important. Okay. So those are the things, if you want to dig in and let's work on it. If people want to know more about our program, just drop us a chat line and we'll reach out and we can talk to you about it. All right, let's go back to de-escalation though. So if you decide it's time to de-escalate rather than break up, what do you do? How do you do it successfully?
Well, we figure out what we want, right?
Exactly.
So the most, is moving from lovers to friends, but we could also have parents to co-parenting. We could have partners to roommates, romantic and sexual partners to only friends with benefit partners. There's a whole bunch of different choices. We may no longer having kink dynamic on top of friendship or a sexual romantic relationship and redefining boundaries there.
We may go from nesting together to not living together. You can maintain the emotional and the sexual and all the other aspects of your relationship, but just decide that living together is not a thing.
Well, you and I have done that, and I've done that with my primary partner as well. So you and I, we both had this idea, understanding that we did not want to live together. And then through a series of mishap adventures, right? The flood in your place, for example, we ended up cohabitating. We were nesting together, but then said, well, it's not really where we wanted to be, but we did it because it was necessary, it was practical, it worked. But then we said, well, it's not really working. It's not our ideal. We still like our autonomy. We still like all the practical things. And we will kind of, in a sense, de-escalate that. So we went from nesting to occasional nesting. And that's how it is with my other partner. We were at one point living together as well. And we said, no, it's going to be modified. And we did do that successfully. And we've maintained our loving relationships.
Yeah, I remember like after the flood and when you decided you didn't want to rent an apartment again. So we were looking for a place to live and we had been living together. And I totally remember the conversation like in my mind having to have with you because we even put an offer on a place, remember? A beautiful place, but it required me to sell my place in order to help fund it because it was, it wasn't a cheap place. It was gorgeous and it would have had a lot of space. But I remember having this moment where I was like, I don't want to sell my place. I still want to have my place. Like I love you and I want to spend time with you. I want to nest with you part of the time, but I don't want to do it 24/7. And I remember having the conversation with you and I was leading up to it, feeling so like scared to have that conversation and then having it. And then you were like, yeah, I don't think I want that either. And thankfully we didn't get that place. We didn't have the winning offer.
But, I must admit that my initial response to you saying you didn't want to live with me, I was taken back a little bit. And I personalized and thought it was about me. But then I realized, well, no, it's not about me. It was your preference, right? So we could still, go having to personalize it and recognize what it is that the other person's wanting and not wanting. And then in the end, I came to realize that, well, actually, I don't want that either. And we're able to still maintain a wonderful, loving relationship regardless of that.
Yeah.
So we can survive these modifications. We can survive these changing relationships.
Yeah, it doesn't have to mean anything more than just not wanting to cohabitate at the same time. And we have that ongoing conversation because our places are so far apart distance-wise, we end up staying together. And we do have those conversations like, is it time for me to go? Do you need to have more space? Do I need to have more space? And I think it's great. That's where that awesome communication has really helped. Anyway, that's a big one I think people have a hard time with in terms of de-escalation is that living together to not living together. So,
right. And, a lot of people, they might do it, that kind of sort of uncoupling to gain greater autonomy, right? Yeah. So they might feel as though, and I felt like this sometimes in our relationship, that I love spending time with you, but then all of a sudden I find that I'm in a kind of mono model, sort of little things about myself have kind of gone by the wayside and I'm less autonomous. So I can remain connected to you, but still maintain my autonomy. And there are ways to do that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And then we talked about this one already, but you may decide part of your de-escalation is to remove the sexual aspects, but maintain the emotional aspects. So some of these things are things that maybe you're going like, that sounds good to me. So then what do?
We communicate.
Yes, communicate. So this can be the tough part, right? Because if you're the one that's initiating it, and if you haven't been having regular check-ins or have opportunities to have these kind of conversations, then I think we need to be gentle with the people that we're with, right? And be thoughtful about how we approach our partners and also being proactive about it. You know what I mean? And not waiting. And so while it may seem like rather than keeping it in, right? I think sometimes we're afraid of hurting the person and then we don't, like with lots of conversations, right? And then we hold it in and we don't tell them. That's actually hurting them more. Sure. So, finding your time, but also being proactive about it. So,
but it's interesting, right? When we shift the relationship, so we might be seeing each other and then say, hey, maybe we want to move in together, and that somehow feels as though it's a so-called pop step. But then if we want to de-nest, is that seen as a negative? So is it harder to introduce those subjects? So it's okay to move in, but it's less okay to move out. Whereas maybe we are nesting with each other, just as an example, and then we find out, well, it's not working quite as well, but maybe we would do well not nesting together. And rather than seeing it as a negative, could it also be seen as a positive? De-nested and still have a very good, loving, close relationship. So you can modify it without it being a so-called negative, right? It might actually, in fact, be a better thing.
Yeah. Well, I think it is, especially if you've gotten into a relationship in your older years and, you're used to living by yourself and doing your own thing and that sort of thing. Living together might not be the natural progression for you. You may need your time alone. I like my time alone. You like your time alone. You know what I mean? And it also offers other opportunities that align with being polyamorous, like seeing other people and that sort of thing.
Yeah, but even if we are nesting with each other, for example, we can still find ways of reclaiming our autonomy if we feel as though it's lacking. We can still find ways of asking for and getting or granting space with each other. Exactly. And it doesn't have to be an indication of our wanting to reject the other person or being rejected by them.
Yeah, I'm so curious if anybody who's listening has ever done this where they've gone from living together to not living together. I know one of the couples I worked with, there was a point at which the one person thought that they might not want to live together. Like they had a big family with kids and that sort of thing, but they were feeling a little crowded in the household. Now they made a different decision later, but we did talk about what it would be like for them and what they would like about not living with their husband versus living with them, and what that might look like, how they would feel, what opportunities it would bring. So, these are the kinds of things to think about if, you're trying to de-escalate a relationship. Like, what is it going to look like? How do I want it to play out? And so then when you have the conversations with your partner, you can do the last thing, which is then co-create the relationship you desire.
Make our own relationship style, right? Because like you were saying about, perhaps if we have children, we might have this default setting. That means we automatically live together. Who's to say that we couldn't still be loving co-parenting people with different domiciles, right? So we can create any kind of relationship we want. We are not handed this blueprint that's written in stone that's automatic. We can decide for ourselves what we want it to be.
Exactly. If anyone who's listening is trying to decide if it's time to call it quits or de-escalate or dig in, work on things, then definitely reach out to chat with us. We love to help. And I say that, with complete honesty and love and support, because I really do. I think sometimes people think like it's an inconvenience to book a call with me, you know what I mean, or with us. And we do love to talk to people and support you and get you to like sort of the next steps. So you can send a Facebook message and we can chat and set something up and talk there. You can also book a relationship rescue call with me. It's completely free. I'll drop the link after the chat. It's basically 45 minutes. We talk about what's going on in your life, and then we make sure you leave with an action plan of next steps that you can do on your own. Or if you'd like additional help to get you there faster, obviously we are here to help you do that. We've helped lots of people and do that, and love to see people be successful in their polyamorous relationships. So yeah.
Awesome.
If you want to explore polyamory, open up a relationship, or try your hand at swinging, we can help. Check out our website at taranandre.com for information on our Poly Newbies digital course or our deeper dive open relationship and polyamory mastery program where you get direct coaching from us. There's also other individual and couples coaching options there as well. Thanks for listening to the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast with T&A. Don't forget to subscribe and give us some love on your favorite podcasting platform. You can check out the show notes for any of the links to the courses or information we talked about today. Thanks, and have a fantastic